All right, let's dive into something kind of sweet, but also pretty complicated. We're talking about sugar. You guys have sent in some really fascinating research about this, especially about how sugar affects kids. And not just, cavities and things like that. We're going to try to really uncover how sugar early on, when kids are young, can really have long-term effects on their health. We'll also look at how sugar is connected to some surprising stuff, things like asthma and even mental well-being. And then maybe we can even look at some practical things that parents and maybe even people who make policies can actually do.
Yeah, it's really amazing what we're still learning about how sugar affects our bodies, from when we're babies to, all the way through adulthood.
I know, it's crazy, right? Okay, so we've got a bunch of stuff to look at today. Excerpts from a study about sugar rationing in the UK, a piece about the first 1,000 days of a child's life and how important those are, and even an herbal formula from the Lost Book of Herbal Remedies by herbalbloom.org. So let's just jump right in. First of all, what is this 1,000-day sugar window that all these sources keep talking about?
Right. So the first 1,000 days of a child's life, basically from conception to when they're about 2 years old, it's a period of, just incredible development. And what we're finding is that the things they eat during that time, it can really set the stage for, their health for their whole lives.
So we're talking about the foundation of their health, right then.
Exactly. Think about it. Their metabolism is developing, their immune system, even their risk for different chronic diseases later on.
Yeah.
All of that's getting shaped during that time.
Wow, yeah. It really makes you think about the choices you make, even before a child is born. You mentioned the study about sugar rationing in the UK, though. What happened there?
So this study looked at what happened in 1953 when sugar rationing ended in the UK. So they look at people who were conceived right before the rationing ended, which meant, sugar became more available when they were in those first 1,000 days, And you know what? Those people, they had a much higher chance of getting diabetes and high blood pressure later in life.
Wait a minute. So people who weren't even born when sugar was rationed, it still affected them decades later. That's kind of wild, isn't it?
It really is. It shows us that even being around more sugar for a short time during those early years, it can really have a big impact on our health later on.
Okay, so that's something to think about for anyone who's pregnant or thinking about becoming pregnant or taking care of young kids, right? But let's move beyond just, obesity and things like that, because this research you sent, it talks about some other connections with sugar that are pretty surprising, like asthma. What's the connection there?
So there was a study that found that mothers who had what they call a low glycemic index diet during pregnancy, they ate less sugar, less processed food, they were more likely to have kids with a lower risk of asthma. And this was especially true for mothers who didn't have as much education, which is interesting.
I've heard of the glycemic index, but can we just do a quick recap on what that actually means?
Sure. The glycemic index, it ranks foods based on how quickly they raise your blood sugar. So a low GI diet means you eat foods that release sugar into your blood slowly. That can help you manage weight and prevent those energy spikes and crashes.
Got it. So how big of a role does sugar actually play when it comes to kids developing asthma?
It's definitely complicated, Sugar isn't the only thing that causes asthma. But, this research tells us it's definitely a part of it, and especially considering how common asthma is in kids today.
Yeah, that's definitely something I think a lot of parents would want to learn more about. Now, gut health is another thing that keeps coming up. What's the connection between sugar and, what's going on in our stomachs?
Well, our guts are full of trillions of bacteria. Some are good, some are bad. And they're all really important for things like our immunity, how we digest food, even mental health. And the thing is, when we eat a lot of sugar, it can mess up the balance of those bacteria. It makes it harder for the good bacteria to do their job.
I know antibiotics can wipe out those gut bacteria too. Does sugar make it even harder to recover from that?
That's what some of the research is pointing to. Yeah, if you take antibiotics, it disrupts your gut microbiome. And then if you have a lot of sugar on top of that, well, it creates an environment where those good bacteria have a hard time coming back.
Yeah.
And that can lead to a weaker immune system.
Wow. Okay, we've talked about asthma, gut health. And of course, I think a lot of people want to know about the connection between sugar and mental health. What did you find in your research about that?
Right. Well, this is a big one. And the research is still, still learning a lot. But there's this big meta-analysis that found a link between eating a lot of sugar and having a higher chance of getting depression. And some studies also suggest that there might be a connection between sugar and anxiety too. especially for women.
So it's not like a direct cause and effect, right? But it's
Yeah.
definitely something to be aware of. Does this mean we all have to give up sugar completely?
Not necessarily. I think it's more about being mindful,
Mhm.
like how much are you eating?
Yeah.
And realizing that sugar could be playing a role in how you feel, mentally.
Okay, so it's all about being, making good choices and being aware. Now, I'm sure a lot of parents listening are wondering about juice, the whole juice versus fruit debate. What do these sources say about that?
I mean, we all know that juice isn't like the healthiest thing, but these sources really lay it out. They did a simulation where they swapped out juice for whole fruit in kids between 1 and 5 years old, and they found that one change could cut their daily sugar by 3 to 5 grams, reduce
Wow.
calories overall, and you know what else? They got a lot more fiber, which, let's face it, most kids don't get enough fiber these days.
Yeah, I've noticed with my own kids that they definitely seem more full, more satisfied after eating whole fruit compared to drinking juice. Like they're actually getting what their bodies need.
Exactly, exactly. Fiber is super important for healthy digestion, helps regulate blood sugar, and it contributes to that feeling of fullness, which, that's really helpful if you're trying to manage a child's weight.
So if you're a parent or caregiver listening right now, here's something you can do today. Swap out the juice box for a piece of fruit and just see what happens. It's a small thing, but it can make a big difference in the long run, right? But, it's not just about what happens at home. These sources also talk about the bigger picture, like the environment we create for kids when it comes to sugar.
Oh, absolutely. We can't just focus on, what one person does. The environment around us and the policies that affect food, they play a big role too.
What kind of policies are we talking about?
Well, think about childcare, for example. One study looked at what would happen if they replaced juice with whole fruit in these settings.
Yeah.
And they found that it could actually raise the daily costs by about 44 to 49 cents per child.
I mean, that might not sound like much, but it definitely adds up for childcare providers, right?
It does. And it raises some important questions like, is that extra cost worth it because it's an investment in the kid's health? Should we be pushing for policies that make it easier and more affordable to choose healthy options?
Yeah. It's like we're investing in their future health, not just waiting to treat problems later on.
Exactly. We need to create an environment where it's easy to make healthy choices, where that's just the normal way to do things.
Right. Okay, before we move on, I wanted to talk about one more thing that I found really interesting about managing sugar cravings. Herbal remedies. One of the sources you sent, the Lost Book of Herbal Remedies, it talks about this formula specifically for kids who are, struggling with sugar. So what can you tell us about that?
Well, the main ingredients in this formula are bilberry, chamomile, fennel, and Ceylon cinnamon.
Ooh, cinnamon. I love cinnamon. But I've heard there are different kinds. What makes Ceylon cinnamon special?
Yeah, so Ceylon cinnamon is considered to be gentler, safer, especially for kids, compared to cassia cinnamon. It's been studied for its ability to help regulate blood sugar levels and how our bodies respond to insulin. So that makes it a really valuable ingredient in this formula.
Okay, so we've got bilberry, chamomile, fennel, Ceylon cinnamon. They're all working together to help kids manage those cravings and maybe even, some of the negative stuff we've been talking about. What about safety, though?
Yeah, that's really important. This is just one approach, and it's really crucial to talk to a healthcare provider before giving any herbal remedies to children, especially if they have other health conditions or are taking medications. Yeah, it's just always best to have that conversation with your child's doctor and figure out what's best for them.
That's a good reminder. Herbal remedies can be powerful, but they're not a one-size-fits-all solution.
Exactly. It's about finding what works for each individual child and working with their healthcare team to make a plan that supports their overall health and well-being. It's really interesting how a lot of this traditional wisdom about herbs and stuff, it's actually lining up with what modern science is finding. Like take bilberry, for example. It's got tons of antioxidants in it, especially these things called anthocyanins.
I've heard of anthocyanins. Aren't those the things that give, like, fruits and veggies their bright colors?
Yeah, exactly. They're pigments. But they do way more than just make things look pretty.
Okay.
Studies are showing that they can actually help regulate blood sugar levels and improve how our bodies use insulin. And they might even protect against some types of cell damage.
So bilberry is not just some, like, random herb, right? There's actual science behind it.
Right, yeah. There's a reason why people have been using it for so long.
Okay, so we've got bilberry. What about the other ingredients in this formula?
Well, there's chamomile. Everybody knows chamomile. It's, famous for its calming effects. It can help soothe the nervous system. help you relax, and it can even help with sleep.
That makes sense, especially when you think about kids who are dealing with those like sugar highs and crashes. That can really mess with their moods and their sleep.
Absolutely. And then we have fennel. Fennel has been used forever to help with digestion and, reduce bloating. I even heard that fennel tea can be really soothing for little kids who have, tummy troubles.
So fennel could help with some of those negative gut effects we talked about earlier. It's like each of these herbs is like tackling a different part of the problem.
Yeah, I like that. It's a holistic approach, right? Looking at the whole child.
Okay, so this formula, it sounds really promising for some families. But again, I want to emphasize how important it is to talk to a doctor or a healthcare provider before trying any new remedies with kids.
Absolutely, yeah.
Yeah.
It's all about being safe.
Mm-hmm.
Herbal remedies, they can be powerful, and you want to use them the right way.
Mm.
A healthcare provider can help you figure out if a particular remedy is right for your child. Make sure it doesn't interact with any medications they're taking, things like that.
It's a team effort, right?
Exactly.
Okay, so we've covered a lot about how sugar affects kids. We talked about the long-term consequences, practical tips for managing sugar intake, and even explored these alternative approaches like herbal remedies. But let's take a step back for a minute. What are some key takeaways our listeners can walk away with?
I think one of the biggest things is realizing that sugar isn't just about, personal choice. It's affected by so many things. Our environment, socioeconomic status, even policies about food.
Yeah, it's easy to just blame people for their choices, right?
Yeah,
But it's way more complicated than that.
exactly. We need to focus on creating environments that help everyone make healthy choices.
It's about building a culture of health, right? Not just telling people to eat less sugar without addressing the bigger issues.
Right, exactly. It takes a multifaceted approach. Education, policy changes, community initiatives, all working together.
So what are some concrete steps listeners can take to make a difference, in their own lives and in their communities?
Well, for parents and caregivers, one of the biggest things is just choosing whole fruits instead of fruit juices. It's a simple swap, but it can make a big difference in how much sugar your kids are getting, and it gives them more fiber, too.
And don't forget about leading by example. Kids are watching us, so show them that you value healthy eating.
Yeah, that's such a good point. And make meal times fun. Get the kids involved in picking out fruits and veggies at the store. Let them help with cooking. It makes it more exciting for them.
Those are great tips. What about listeners who want to learn more about herbal remedies?
Do your research. And like we said before, talk to a qualified healthcare provider to be safe. Herbal remedies can be a great addition to a healthy lifestyle, but they should always be used responsibly.
Teamwork.
Exactly.
Okay, now, going beyond individual choices, what about advocating for changes in the bigger picture, to support healthy eating?
There's so much we can do. We can support policies that limit how sugary foods are marketed to kids. Advocate for more access to fresh produce in communities that need it. Push for more nutrition education in schools. Our voices matter.
It's about moving from individual responsibility to collective action. We can all be part of making a healthier future for everyone.
Absolutely. And remember, even small changes can make a big difference. Focus on what you can control. Support policies that promote healthy choices and celebrate every step towards a better food environment.
Okay, so we've talked about a lot of practical stuff, but there's one thing we haven't really touched on yet: the emotional side of sugar. I know for me, sometimes I just crave something sweet, for comfort or as a reward. What are your thoughts on that?
That's such an important point. Sugar is really tied to our emotions, comfort, celebrations, even cultural traditions. It's not just about the physical effects, it's about what it means to us.
We all have our own relationship with food, right? It's not about being totally against sugar. It's about finding a balance that works for you and your family.
I love that. It's about being mindful, really paying attention to how sugar makes you feel, both physically and emotionally.
And that balance is going to be different for everyone. One thing I've noticed is that sugar really affects my sleep. If I have dessert too close to bedtime, I'm up all night tossing and turning. Is there a connection there?
Oh, definitely. The sugar-sleep connection is something we need to pay more attention to. When we eat sugary foods, especially late at night, it can lead to those blood sugar spikes and crashes we talked about, and that can mess with your sleep.
So those late-night sugar cravings could actually be making it harder to sleep. It's like a vicious cycle.
Yeah, it really is. And when you don't get enough sleep, it can throw off your hormones, make you more stressed, affect your mood, even weaken your immune system. It's all connected.
Wow, it's like a domino effect. So what can we do to break that cycle?
Well, it's not just about avoiding sugar before bed. It's about having good sleep habits in general. Have a regular sleep schedule, manage your stress, make sure your bedroom is cool, dark, and quiet.
Okay, welcome back to the last part of our deep dive on sugar. We've learned a lot about how it affects kids, but there's still a couple of really interesting things in this research that we haven't talked about yet.
Yeah, it's amazing how sugar impacts so many things we don't usually think about, you know?
Hmm.
Like beyond just weight gain and cavities. For example, we're going to talk about how sugar is connected to inflammation in the body
Mm-hmm.
and even look at some possible links to cognitive function, like how our brains work.
Okay, inflammation is one of those words you hear all the time these days, but what's the connection between sugar and inflammation exactly?
Well, when we eat a lot of sugar, it triggers like a chain reaction in our bodies.
Hmm.
And that leads to these molecules being released that cause inflammation. And if that inflammation keeps happening, over time, it can really set us up for a whole bunch of health problems.
Sure.
Heart disease, type 2 diabetes, autoimmune disorders, even some types of cancer.
So it's not just about the immediate effects of sugar, like the quick energy boost and then the crash. It's more about this low-level inflammation that's always there that can cause serious problems later.
Exactly. It's like a slow burn that really damages our health over time. And this is especially a problem for kids, Their bodies are still growing and developing, so they might be even more vulnerable to these disruptions.
Yeah, that makes sense. Their systems are still figuring everything out. You mentioned cognitive function too. What's the link between sugar and how our brains work?
Right, so this is an area where we need more research. But there are some studies that suggest that eating a lot of sugar, it might be connected to problems with memory and attention, and even a higher risk for kids to develop neurodevelopmental disorders like ADHD.
So sugar could affect how kids learn and think. That's a pretty big deal.
It is. It really highlights how important it is to think about what we're feeding our kids and ourselves, of course. It's not about never having sugar, but about finding balance.
I think that's been a big theme throughout all this research. It's not about eliminating sugar entirely. It's about making smart choices and having a healthier relationship with it.
Absolutely. And it goes beyond just what individuals do. These sources talk a lot about the importance of creating an environment that helps kids make healthy choices.
So how can we do that? What can we do as individuals and as a society?
Well, as individuals, we can start by being mindful of the food we buy
Mm.
and, the meals we cook. We can also teach our kids about balanced eating and help them develop those habits early on.
It's like setting them up for a lifetime of healthy choices.
Exactly. And then beyond what we do as individuals, we can push for policies that make healthy choices easier, like limiting how sugary foods are advertised to kids, making fresh produce more affordable and accessible, and promoting nutrition education in schools.
So it's about creating this culture of health, right? Where it's easier for everyone to make good choices.
Right, it takes all of us working together.
Well, I think we've covered a lot in this deep dive. We talked about the surprising long-term effects of sugar, especially for kids. We looked at some practical tips for managing sugar intake, and even explored some alternative approaches, like those herbal remedies.
Yeah, it's been a really interesting conversation.
It has. It really shows how everything in our health is connected, and how even small choices can make a big difference. Before we go, is there anything else you want to share with our listeners?
After seeing how much these early years matter, I would just ask everyone, what's one small change you can make today to create a healthier future for yourself or for the kids in your life? Maybe it's swapping soda for water, or eating more fruits and veggies, or maybe it's speaking up in your community and pushing for policies that support healthier eating. Every step counts, no matter how small.
That's a great point. Well, thank you so much for being here today and sharing your expertise with us.
My pleasure.
And to all our listeners, thanks for joining us on this deep dive. Keep learning, keep asking questions, and keep making choices that support your health and well-being.